The Future of Teamwork is a Huddle 3 production for Leader. Subscribe today and never miss an episode. Welcome to The Future of Teamwork, the show where we explore fresh perspectives and practical ideas to help leaders build healthier, more resilient, high-performing teams. Today's episode is part of a special 5-part Leader Lab series, and we're doing something a little different. As you listen, we'll invite you to step into the shoes of our guests by reflecting on 8 real-world leadership challenges. It's a chance to compare your thinking to theirs and learn something new about your own leadership style along the way. To help you go deeper, we've included a brand new leadership development exercise in the show notes. It's called How Do You Leader? And it's a short set of reflective prompts you can work through on your own or with your team. Think of it as a leadership workout designed to stretch your thinking and strengthen your impact. Now let's get into today's episode. Today, Dane speaks with Erik Woodward, Chief Operating Officer at Streamline Innovation, one of Time Magazine's top 10 green tech companies of 2024. With a background in global leadership roles at Chevron and Bechtel, Erik brings a unique perspective on what it takes to transition from the structure of large enterprises into the fast-paced, high-stakes environment of a tech startup. In this episode, Dane explores how leadership habits are reshaped when moving into founder-led cultures, the personal influences that shape how teams collaborate under pressure, and what it really takes to build cohesion across functions when the stakes are high and resources are tight. Through Erik's eyes, you'll have the chance to jump into the nuanced space of tech startups and see just how effective your team building tactics are at the leading edge of ambiguity. As always, you'll find bonus resources in the show notes, including this episode's How Do You Leader leadership development exercise. Let's dive into episode 4 of the Future of Teamwork Leader Lab series, Building Teams at Scale in Times of Change. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Future of Teamwork podcast. Today we're diving into a Leader Lab with Erik Woodward. Erik's the COO of Streamline Innovations, and it's going to be exciting learning more about his mindset and approach to leadership. Welcome to the show, Erik.
Well, thanks, Dane. Thanks for having me.
We've shared some interesting parallels in our lives. We were talking pre-show about, life in Indonesia and working in the oil and gas industry. Perhaps you could expand a little bit more on some of your lived experiences that have brought you to this moment.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Odd coincidence, of course, that I grew up and spent 11 years in Jakarta, Indonesia. My father was working for ExxonMobil at the time. And it sounds like, Dane, you were in Australia as well, so we weren't too far off. We might have run into each other in Bali or something.
There's a good chance. So having grown up there, Erik, you found your way into the oil and gas industry, and you spent some time with, I think it was Bechtel, so big EPC, and then
Sure.
into Chevron. Maybe you could expand a little bit on sort of what that career journeys look like to bring you into Streamline Innovations.
Yeah, definitely. I having had that experience internationally, I really wanted the same for my family when I started it and for my kids to grow up abroad and have those experiences. So out of school, I started with Bechtel. I was a front-end design engineer, process engineer. We worked on international LNG plants, gas treating plants. Did that for a few years, but I realized Bechtel wouldn't provide for me the opportunity to live abroad. And so I quickly connected with a friend over at Chevron and joined Chevron. This was back in 2005 as a consultant. And shortly thereafter, I had the opportunity to move to Brazil and lived in Rio de Janeiro for approximately 4 years. That was the first opportunity that I had, one, to work on an offshore platform, which was a pretty great experience in the oil and gas field, but also the first time to lead a team there of a couple of facility engineers. And we did typically $1 to $10 million capital projects to keep the unit running and make it highly efficient.
And Rio is a beautiful part of the world too.
Oh yeah, and great people, and just really, really enjoyed that time there, and spent, a good portion of the next decade working in a variety of roles at Chevron. I had a finance role that we were working on the strategic planning side, which was a great experience. And then shortly thereafter, I took over a $1 billion asset, which was the Rangeley field, which is an old legacy CO2 flood, where I was the first time I was leading a team of reservoir engineers, which was also pretty exciting, doing development projects. But it was the first time I actually had external stakeholders, private equity teams, individual shareholders of that arranged the asset, and how to navigate those challenges well too. And stayed at Chevron for a few more years after that.
That's neat that just within one organization, you can have that variety of experience running different teams, different functions, different assets, different stakeholders. It's pretty cool.
Definitely. And Chevron did a pretty incredible job of that I was a facility engineer, topside surface guy. They sort of threw me in to the reservoir engineers and the geologists, which, I hadn't done anything subsurface to that point, but spent a lot of time with the team the first few months and really found a way to navigate that asset. And we ended up in, I guess it was 2015. That was the only profitable cash flowing asset, I would say, in that area.
That was a hard year, 2015.
In a hard year, a lot of tough challenges, a lot of, reallocation of resources and moving people around to make that happen. But
yeah,
it was a pretty fun assignment for me.
That's neat. And so I know pre-show we were talking a little bit about how when you're working for a big business like Chevron, you can pull a lever when there's certain HR and teamwork issues that need to be addressed. But having then jumped into a startup, you've gone back to sort of building from the ground up now.
That's right. And one of the reasons I ultimately chose to leave Chevron is while I enjoyed a lot of the opportunities that I had there and a lot of the teams I was able to lead, that you were somewhat compartmentalized and you had a huge infrastructure around you, right? These are the HR processes that you have to follow, right? These are the other procedures that you need to do. And part of me was wondering, do I have the abilities to be able to stand up and run an entire business based on my experiences? And so around 2017, I was approached by a friend of mine who said, "Hey, there's a clean energy startup in Dallas, and small company. Why don't we get together and grow it?" And they brought me in as the COO at the time, and so to go from a 80,000 person company to a 15-person company, that was quite the adjustment. And realizing if you didn't have a process or procedure, or if you didn't have the people, you better get on the phone that day and make it happen, or else it's not going to happen.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was on a show earlier today with Steve Cadigan, who'd been there at LinkedIn as their first chief human resource officer. And he said one of the most pivotal moments in his career was when he left a big corporate and went to a startup, because everything that he'd been trained on and learned in large organizations, he then had to really compress down and take personal accountability for, everything from simplifying processes to the storytelling to something that you and I were touching on pre-show, which is just leading by example. You're so much more visible in a small team in everything that you do.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about is there's no place to hide, right? And if you're not pulling your weight, right, it's readily apparent. And I didn't appreciate the fact, right? So you come into a big company like Chevron, it's like, well, issue the PO for that part. We'll send an invoice. Finance will take care of that. And then you join a small company, and it's like, well, who's issuing the PO? Who's setting up the ERP process? Well, I guess I am, right? And I'm sitting there drawing it out and then implementing the process and procedure, and then hiring the people to do it. And it is rewarding at the end of the day, but then you realize, wow, you have to build all the gears of the machine to make it turn.
Yeah. It's confronting at first, but then also fascinating to have that level of influence and to be shaping the way that our teams get to work and our customers get to experience us.
Well, and you get the opportunity too, is that most of the people that join startups, not all, but many people who join the startups are out of school, right? Who have very limited experience, or maybe it's their first or maybe second job. So you have these highly competent people that are usually brilliant, coming from, top of their school, and you get to shape how they're interacting with their business life and the business world and how they shape their management experience. And, we have this one employee with the company I'm at now who came out of school, and, I've been able to help over the last 4 years sort of shape, how do you approach project management? How do you approach billing? How do you talk to a customer in a way that is respectful, but at the same time enforces what the contract says, right? And navigating that balance. And it's very rewarding to be able to do something like that.
Yeah, I must admit, that's been one of my favorite aspects of leadership is that coaching in role. I mean, there's always managing tasks and the administrative management of like promotions and that's all good. But when you get to coach someone through how they're going to approach a particular problem set, a tough customer conversation, it's super rewarding.
Well, and especially if they've had, in some cases, people come to us from other companies where they didn't have the opportunity, right? Or there was a negative situation, right? Where they fell out of it and said, wow, I didn't realize business was supposed to be like that. Well, it doesn't have to be like that, right? And let's show how a successful company can structure this and do this. And, that's going to affect not just for however long they are with your company for the next 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is. It's for their whole career, right? The foundational work that you experience. I mean, think back into your 20s and early 30s, right? The foundation that you laid at that point is how you end up fulfilling your career in your 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Yeah.
And, we can't, as leaders, we can't take that lightly.
I'm fascinated, Erik, when you come from a large corporation, when you've worked across different functions and facilities, and then you get into a startup, how much relearning do you have to do as an experienced, leader?
I think it's going to be situational, but I think that the no one is coming to save you, right? There's no backstop, right? Is really what I come back to. And, I don't know if you've read the Netflix biography, but one of the things that he talks about is that he was very successful in his career, and he goes out and starts Netflix, and they're out there and they're putting DVDs into the envelope, and they're doing that for years, right? And here's this guy who was, a VP at a big company, and he decides to start Netflix, and then he spends, how many months or years stuffing envelopes at the end of the day until 9 o'clock at night. And I just remember reading that when I made the transition, and I was sort of laughing, is that, you think, you work your way up structurally in a big company, and you get to shed some of your less desirable, tasks, and you get to focus on, who am I meeting with, or how am I structuring this, and I'm building this Excel task list, to go to, okay, I'm actually out there pulling a hose on site and connecting the skid, but I'm the COO, or guess what? My operator quits and is not available on this holiday weekend. I'm flying out to Denver because I have an irate customer, and I'm going to go and sit there and put the valves on the unit, right? And you just realize that you have to let some of your pride go a little bit, right? And that's okay. I mean, in some cases, that's actually fairly healthy, right? To be like, oh, I'm the COO and I'm running these units. But I mean, I think it's important that you realize, you have to do whatever you need to do to get the job done. Now, again, as we've built up and we've been successful in Streamline and built processes and procedures, am I out there operating on the weekends? No, I don't want people to believe that. But as part of the development process, as you take a step back, is you're going to have to do things that maybe you thought you were past, at this stage in your career. And, you're going to have to spend more time explaining things to people that you thought were intuitive. And that's okay too, right? Because you're bringing them along on this journey.
Yeah. And so I like it. It's learning and serving is kind of what I'm hearing there, Erik. And it's healthy, not like you say, not to always be doing, but to do it at a particular moment of change and inflection point to, be visible as a leader to your team, to your customers.
Right. I mean, if you ask your people to do something that you won't do, I mean, that's almost a principle in leadership, right? You should never be in a situation where you would ask anybody to do something you wouldn't personally be willing to do. Not that you should, right? Because you should be building an organization that survives, beyond you, or, is able to function without you. But in the pinch, you've got to be willing to be that person.
Yeah. I know sometimes on that point, I've struggled as a leader to give bad tasks to people. I'm like, I'm going to do this because this sucks. I don't want to give this to anyone to do. But my coach who walked through that with me, because it was more than once, he was saying, look, Dane, the fact is that you're not responsible for their growth opportunity. Like, this is their growth opportunity. They might have to go and get on a plane and cover for a teammate on a rough, weekend that they'd planned to be with their family. But If you carry it for everyone, going back to your point, you're not going to be at your healthiest and sharpest and most vibrant self to be able to grow the business, and you're stealing that opportunity for growth from that team member. So that helped me really framing the opportunity for growth.
That's such an important point, and I've seen this as when I came into the company, there was really sort of the individual contributors and then just the top level, right? There was no intermediate. And so what I've been focusing on as we've been growing the company is you start asking the high performers to step into supervisor roles or even VP roles, right? But since they were the high performers, right, and they want to do a good job and they want to appear that they're ready for that, a lot of times when they step into that role, they won't let the people below them fail.
Yeah.
And one of the things I spend a lot of time coaching my team on is like, pick the things that is okay for them to fail on and give them those tasks. Because one, I don't want you spending your time doing it because I've asked you to do higher level strategic things. So if you're doing those tasks, then you're not really doing your main job. And then secondly, you're not building up the team behind you. And look, it's not 100%, right? So I have, again, one employee I was talking to yesterday, which was really neat, where she was saying that, you know what, like I've asked a lot of my team over the last 3 weeks. They've been in the field and traveling all over. And we had another unit deployment. And she's like, I normally would have asked them to do it. But since they were away from their family for 3 weeks, I decided to come out here for 2 weeks. I was like, that's a good balance of leadership. And I feel like you found the balance in the trade-off of, I'm going to ask my team to do all these tasks, but every now and then there's going to be a time that I'm going to have to step in and help.
Yeah, I think that's always good for a leader to do. One of my research items that I've been focusing on lately is how a leader chooses what work to do with their team, because leaders can do a lot of work on their own, but choosing selectively what work and when to do with the team can be really powerful.
That's right. And it's sometimes, we get those things wrong too, right? I gave a task, recently to someone to tackle, and I probably should have gone shoulder to shoulder with them for a little bit longer at the beginning to make sure it was framed right. Now they ended up in the right place. It took a little bit longer, right? But sometimes we can look at it and go, you know what? I just really don't want to do that right now. And sometimes that's not the best choice as a leader.
No, that's it. That's totally it. And it's interesting what you said about the okay to fail piece. One of my colleagues just posted today on, I think it was a Jeff Bezos structure that he used, which was one-way doors and two-way doors. And he was like, if it's a one-way door, it's a decision that if we get it wrong, we can't step back and correct it. That's going to have high impact to safety or customer experience, whatever else. But if it's a two-way door, it's one that, hey, if we get it wrong, we can come back, adjust, and do it again. He's like, just let those go.
Yeah, that's a good way to frame it. Like for us, really the only critical ones at our companies are safety ones, right? So on all the safety decisions, like if we're doing hot work or something on the customer site that's a critical lift or whatever, like I'm actively involved in those items. But really, once we start moving away from that customer engagements, can we bring it back if we really have a bad customer engagement? Usually we can, right? It's like, I'm going to let you go ahead and take that, right? Can we design or modify an engineering solution that's not safety critical and it not meet our expectations? Yeah, we can come back from that one too. So understanding those pain points and those limitations is important.
That's super cool. So that's actually a good segue into, if you were to summarize like what your key influences have been into this moment of leadership, what 2 or 3 things stand out as like those more pivotal moments or experiences?
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about this beforehand, and I would say I'll start with a probably work-related one, and I'll think of maybe a personal related one too. But one of the times when I stepped into sort of my first assignment where I had direct reports, and this is when I was abroad internationally in Brazil. And I had the supervisor at the time, who was the facility engineering supervisor, who was a very calm, patient, collected person. And I remember as, being an aggressive, well, I say aggressive, but wanting to do the best job I could engineer and wanting to do a great, keep the unit running, unit uptime. I mean, you're familiar with the oil and gas industry. It's production efficiency, right? Barrels, got to get it across the lat meter. And wanting to show, pick up the bag, go offshore whenever is needed. I actually started becoming pretty harsh, and we had a great group of engineers of a team. And I remember I was pushing him real hard and pretty aggressive. And we actually had a few, I would call them pretty serious incidents during my time there that we were able to navigate. And I just remember him being very calm, very collected, wanted to get everything right, especially in stressful situations, right? He became very centering, is probably the best phrase I would use for that. And I would go up to him and was like, why aren't you angry? He's like, because anger doesn't solve the problem in front of us, right? There's times for that. Don't get me wrong. But one of my big takeaways as a supervisor there, right, is the best thing in those stressful situations to a high-performing team is to show that you're patient, you're working it, you put together a framework, and you challenge it. You go up to your management. You continue to manage those lines. And I guess I took away from it like, man, there is a much better way to approach some of these high-pressure situations than I naturally was drawn to, right? Hair on fire, pounding the table kind of deal. And I think that that's really, we talked about allowing people to fail and creating space for people to grow. I think that's one of the big things I take away from that leadership there. And look, people have issues all the time. Like I'll say, like, personal life will affect work life, right? I have employees that have gone through divorces, right, or employees that have had an immediate death in the family, or who have gone through substance abuse issues, right? And to know when to toe the line on a technical issue and to find the space and the patience to address the person where they're at, whether it's a stressful work situation, a stressful personal situation, I think that's really allowed me to sort of create a more holistic view around my leadership style and still achieve the goals, right, that we need, but find the right way to direct that. I think that's a hard thing for leaders, especially in high-performing teams and in stressful businesses like oil and gas, right, where you're servicing a customer, or a lot of times when I was offshore, the tanker's coming, right? Like you don't have time to call it back. It's coming to take your oil, and it's down. Like, you got to find an answer in 12 hours, or you're in trouble. I think that's part of it. Some of the, we talked a little bit about at the beginning servant leadership, right? And understanding your team and understanding how to get the best out of them. And some cases, people are all different. I interact with my CEO a lot, and we laugh about it. But I tell him, I was like, how you tell me that I'm doing a good job? You don't call me, right? Because if you're not calling me, I know that you trust me to get the job done. And so we have a good laugh about it. But that's sort of the way that we interact, right? And so my team has somewhat adapted to that and been like, you know what, if Erik's not calling us and the tasks are still getting completed, he must know we're doing a good job. But anyways, like, going back to the leadership influence, that was the first one that I think really, I pivoted the way, you see in Hollywood movies, right, bosses and aggressive and everything. I was like, man, maybe there's a better way. And Chevron as a whole, when I was there, modeled that pretty well. There was a lot of good leaders that approached a lot of very stressful situations in a managed and structured way.
Yeah, I agree. I had that experience myself with a number of Chevron teams that I supported.
Yeah.
Very cool. And if there was another influence, you said maybe outside of work that shaped your views on teamwork, what might that have been, Erik?
I think, I've been heavily involved in churches throughout my career. And I think that, being involved in churches and church structure, and, I've been in things like church bands and understanding how to, again, going back to the emotional side of leadership, understanding that you're serving something greater, right, than what's necessarily in front of you or the issue that's necessarily in front of you. And understanding that bringing people along with you is sometimes just as important as completing the task. And experiencing that in a church setting. And there was one situation I won't speak too much about. I was on the board of a church, and we had to navigate it through some pretty hard issues around finances and contracts and non-church related stuff, right? But how do you run a building and all that kind of stuff? But the team sort of rallied around this common mission that was bigger than ourselves, right? And able to pour into the community, and that was a pretty valuable experience.
Yeah, I've found sometimes the mission-based work, whether it's in a religious or a non-religious basis, can really be activating for people that aren't actually paid to work together. They're volunteers.
That's right.
And it's just a very different experience, but it can actually be very refreshing. I kind of call it outside influence. It's always amazing what your teamwork away from your paid work can do, and what you can bring back from it to your team members in the paid environment.
That's right. And you definitely have a boss in that situation that you want to make sure is pleased with you, right?
Yeah, exactly. Very cool. So if you kind of think around a really positive big achievement that you were able to go out there and execute on with the team, what would that be? What stands out to you where you're just like, gee, the team really rallied around this and we did a great job?
I'll just give a recent example. One of the things that we were challenged in our company was we had a customer who was pretty happy with our unit runtime and unit status. But they said, you know what, because of some technical reasons, we really need you to run without tripping your units, which we thought was a near impossible task. So when you think about in the oil and gas space with rotating equipment, and it has to be serviced, it has to be run, we have to intervene in it. So this customer challenged us, with a pretty big financial incentive, and said, I just want you to do better, right, than you're doing now, even though we're well above the contract minimum. And so I sat with my team and I said, okay, I'm not sure this is possible, right? But what are the components we need to break this down to make it possible? And so we had a team meeting where we got the whole team together, 20 people. And we said, let's just spitball it, right? And we put together all these things. As no ideas off limits. And so we put all these different ideas on the table and came up with, 30 or so. And then we ranked them. And we came up with the top 10. And this was about 2 years ago. And I said, okay, let's just start chipping away at them. And I handed this over to one of our lead engineers. And typically, on projects like this, people get fired up for the first few months and do a few things and say, oh, it's not quite working. And, it falls off the table and we go on to the next big fire, right? And this particular engineer started chipping away at it. And over the course of the year, we started seeing across our fleet the units performing better and better. And once you create sort of a tidal wave effect, right, you compound on it. And then the operators in the field said, oh, the engineers are making these changes. It's making our life easier. I'm going to spend the time to keep the unit clean. And by keeping the unit clean, things got better. And this compounding effect, and we ended up hitting this metric.
That's awesome.
And we thought that was great. And then the next month we hit the metric. And the next month again, we hit the metric. And then we got better, even still. And now, we're sitting here like 12 months after, and every single month we hit a metric that I quite frankly told the team was pretty much impossible at the beginning. But we broke it into small pieces. We got people motivated. And once we showed the initial results and directionally we're heading the same way, everybody else started piling on and we saw these results. And it not only was it rewarding for the team, but there was a major financial benefit to the company as well.
Oh, that's a fantastic example, Eric. I know pre-show you and I talked a little bit about mattering. I think you picked up on one of our earlier podcasts, and
that was Jonathan, right? Jonathan's podcast.
Yeah, it was. And mattering to me is so important right now. It's something I'm really spending a lot of time around because it hasn't got a big, brand issue like DEIB does. No matter where you stand on earth, politically or otherwise, you can just come together and say, hey, we want to matter. We want to matter to our teammates, to our family members. And the way you described that example of, hey, the engineers chipped away at it and they improved the way that the unit was running, which meant that the operators kept it clean. The team starts to achieve more together because they care for each other, because they're like, hey, the engineering team is significant and important in their work they're doing, and I want to support them. And then it just scaffolds and it reinforces something as you've achieved, which is just awesome.
Well, and what I like about that, right, is then I challenge them to do something that's even harder, right? And they're like, well, I don't know if we can do it, but let's try, right? And we talk about, again, just to build on the mattering phrase, is like there's so much, quite frankly, chaos in the world right now, right? And particularly with recent events. And it's like you get overwhelmed and you don't know what to do, right? And even sometimes the same cases at work, right? Especially in a small startup company, right? Which of the 100 issues today can we focus on, right? And what's really neat is that, like, I tell people, like, sometimes I walk in and tell my engineers this and they sort of laugh at me. It's like, take your notebook, close it, and there's 100 items on your list, push it away, go to the printer, pull out a white sheet of paper and put it on your desk. What are the 3 things you got to do today to make that thing work, right? And then when you're done with it, pick up your paper, crumple, and throw it in the trash and do it again tomorrow. And it's like, but more importantly, like when you get that sense of completion on that one thing that mattered to you, like I moved it along, right? And it's like society as a whole. Like if you think about everything, like you'll be overwhelmed. But pick the one thing that you can make the influence on, or the one person that you can make the influence on, and it's going to matter to them, and it's going to matter to you to see the results.
I love that bias for action. I love the uncertainty that is sort of embraced by it. And, hey, I'm not sure we can do this, but let's try. I think that creates that growth opportunity for a lot of people. And then I think it creates a muscle, because one of our guests who came on talked about the epiphany effect, which was like when a team goes through a hardship or a learning moment together, their bonds strengthen.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, you're seeing that. And so it just creates this belief, which is what I've always enjoyed about being on great teams. If you're on a great team, you know that not everything is going to go great, but when a hole emerges, someone's either going to just fill in without you having to ask, or they're not going to be offended if you're like, hey, Bob, I need you to slide left right now and do that. Because you're all there. You've got that common mission. You've got that belief in each other, and it matters. Right. Yeah.
You got to lay the groundwork on that, right? We lay the groundwork on that in our teams, and right, then we got hit. Last year we had a project that was running very poorly, right? And this engineer came alongside me and she's like, hey, I know I'm not involved in this project, but how can I help? And we went shoulder to shoulder and unwound everything and, built tons of, Excel spreadsheets to reconcile the information and get in front of the customer and bring the project back on track. And I was, it took us hours, right? Tens, hundreds of hours in some cases. And we ended up in a great place, and the unit got up and it was running. And now the CEOs come back to us and said that we, really, really enjoyed the product that we provided. But it took the 2 years of groundwork and relationship building for the engineer to understand, hey, I'm not involved in that, but I can come alongside you and help with that. And like, that's the culture you want to build, right? The culture of like, hey, I'm going to run into that fire, even I know my plate is full, because I know I can fix it, right? It's what I have to do as a leader sometime. But what really is rewarding is when you see your team turn around and start doing that.
Yeah, that's super rewarding. Staying with culture, let's jump into the hypothetical. I always love to ask a leader like yourself when you come on, hey, if you found this situation, what would you do? So it's not necessarily your business. Let's say one of our listeners out there turns up to work tomorrow and they've got one of their customers just breathing down their neck. Hey, this solution that you sold me just doesn't work. It doesn't do what you said it does. And that solution involves, 2 or 3 different teams from functions that you don't manage. You might have to go and talk to engineering or sales or marketing or whatever. As a leader, how do you start bringing that group together to troubleshoot, to problem solve, to take that first step?
Yeah, I mean, this is happened a few times in my career. So I'm speaking from a little bit of experience, but I would say the first thing is understand the commitment, right? And so typically what I do in those situations, right, is say what was written in writing that we committed to the customer, right? Obviously first. And then what has been verbally committed, right? Because even though maybe contractually we're not responsible for verbal commitments, like that's a respect and relationship kind of thing. And so once I gather that information, right, and where our position is, I typically call the customer directly, right, and level with them, right? And I usually would get chewed out, or they would explain their frustration, right? And I would document it. Then we go back to the same team, right? And we'd look at, the contractual requirements. We'd look at what the customer's saying. Some of it's true, some of it's not, that I have to go back and correct. But I was saying that I tell my team that's served us very well, right? Bad news early, right? I think everybody understands what that means. But it's silly because I say this, right, to reinforce it. But I tell the team, it's like, never lie. Never, ever lie, right? You want to maintain a relationship with a customer, but lying means not withholding information as well, too, right? And so, right, it's like as soon as we know, hey, there's a piece of equipment that's not functioning right that we sold you and we're going to fix it and make it better. Like there's no smoke screen. Once we know, they know, right? No, within reason, right? If we still need to run tests and all that kind of stuff, but we now know the framework. I now know what the customer thinks. And then we get together and understand what the limitations are and we reconcile and then we communicate the truth, right? And we say, this is what our beliefs are and this is how we're going to fix it for you. And we tell the customer, these are the 3 or 4 or 5 things and it's going to take us 5 weeks or however long it would take. And I will tell you, to a person, as long as I am very transparent with them and communicate information before they have to find it on their own, it 100% goes, like, it's not fine, right? Don't get me wrong. Like, people are losing money, there's challenges and everything. But I would say there's a level of respect that's maintained that allows us the time to navigate through those issues, right? And I think that's just so important. And that's why the team just laughs, right, when I say never lie, because it's like, of course nobody lies. But that's sort of loaded, right? Because it's like, we don't withhold. We give information and data as clear as we have it, right? We are putting our cards on the table because, look, our customers trust us, right? They've trusted us with their facility, right? They've trusted us with their money. They've trusted us with all sorts of things. We always want to deliver a product that runs when you push the button go, and we successfully do that all the time. But when it doesn't, we have to be partners with them as we go along.
Oh, I think that's a brilliant example. It clearly comes from a great leader and also a process engineer, because you just flowed out 5 steps that make a lot of sense. And if they make sense to me or to a listener, like, you can document in a process like that. Hey, here's how we deal with customer issue resolution. Right. And so everyone kind of has that psychological safety and trust in, hey, when this happens, we can bring bad news early because we know what the next step is and who's involved. So that's a great hypothetical. Thank you.
And look, and sometimes you will encounter people that just want to vent, and no matter what, right? Like they're going to be frustrated, right? And that's part of your role, right? As a leader in the company, is that you have to allow yourself to be a sounding board for the customer to clear that. But I do find that usually when we engage with people that have a lot of technical background, right, who understand the complexities of how we operate, reasonable heads always prevail.
Yeah. Oh, that's neat. Great hypothetical. Thanks, Erik. So we're into the lightning round, some quick fire questions, sort of, I'll give you a question, you give me a sentence. So, in your mind, what's a mistake that teams often make when it comes to collaboration?
Oh, yeah. They're not clear with one another, for sure. Like, I tell people, if it's not documented, it doesn't happen. So people walk away, finance here's this, right? Sales here's this, engineering here's this. 4 weeks later, you have a different product. But if you don't leave the meeting with it written down in an email follow-up, you're toast.
I love that. So clarity and leave the meeting with written expectations. What's your favorite way to celebrate a team's success?
It's a great question. A team success. So a lot of times, individual success will give a gift card. A lot of times, I'll try and call them out when we have company meetings. In regards to team success or milestones, typically our CEO actually loves to do this. he loves to schedule like a pickleball event, right? And be
Okay.
like, when we hit a certain milestone or a certain, EBITDA target or whatever, like he's like, okay, let's all get together and celebrate this win and play pickleball. And he has a joke where he says, whoever wins gets to be CEO for the day. And so then he slides the name card out from his office and he slides their name card in. So
That's
sort
awesome.
of a fun way to
I love the
highlight
play and fun that you're weaving in there too, because that's so human. It's so great
Yeah.
to see. Super good. And the last one, how can leaders ensure that all voices are heard on the team without drowning out, the core message of what needs to be explored on the day?
There's a great phrase that I used to actually learn from, you talked about a coach, and, that's another thing we could talk probably 30 minutes on. I think everybody should have a coach for one reason or another. But I learned it as what else, right? And I would say at the end of every meeting, right, you have to provide 5 or 10 minutes and say, what else? And if it's a small enough group, you call each person out, but you leave a space to be like, I need people to know that I'm leaving this meeting with an expectation or an action item. And if you don't agree with that, then you need to speak up now. So what else does anybody have to say? And, this came up, just last week, and we had an employee who said, I don't agree with this decision. I said, great, let's talk about that. And then we pivoted at the end, right? It didn't completely change the decision, but it changed the approach. So that just little phrase at the end of every meeting, especially in groups of 10 or smaller, and saying, well, what else?
I like that. It's very safe. You're not putting anyone on the spot. And if people get in the rhythm and the routine, as you suggest, then it becomes a norm. Very cool.
Right.
Well, this has been a great conversation. My closing question, Erik, is as you think about your team, like what are your hopes for your team? What do you hope that they get to see in the next 5 years in the workplace that, maybe you can see a little bit of it today and you're going to see more later, or maybe it's something new, but what might be out there that just captures your imagination?
I have this conversation, with all the leaders on my team, right? Every month we review the P&L because I want to make sure they understand it. But at the end, I tell them this. I go, my hope for you guys is that 5 or 10 years from now, you have my job or my job someplace else, right? The best reward, I would think, at least for me as a leader, the best reward is replication, right? And being able to say that I was able to give you all the tools that you needed to become, they're going to be different leaders than I'm going to be. They're going to have different approaches. They're going to have different ways of doing things. I don't want to replicate myself, right? I want to replicate in them the tools that they can use their characteristics to become better leaders. And I would say 10 years from now, if they're able to lead teams, successful teams to meet the goals and find reward in that, man, that's a pretty rewarding way to look at your job.
It is. And it's a great way to look back on teams. I love that vision too. I always look back on great teams that I was on and I look at what we all subsequently went to do and how it ties back to that moment of learning or tool building or whatever it was that we went through. So that's cool. Right. I love that energy. Well, it's been a pleasure today, Erik. I know we're up on time. It feels like we could easily have had that half-hour coaching conversation, but we'll stay connected and find other ways to keep looking at healthy teams.
No, that sounds great, and I really appreciate the time, and it was a fun chat.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk soon.
Thanks.
Thanks, Erik.
Just a quick note before we go. The views and opinions shared in this episode are those of our guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host, Dane Groeneveld, the leader group, our patron Huddle 3, or our partners and affiliates. Any scenarios discussed are for the purpose of fueling creative thinking and conversation, and should be viewed only in this context. Dane, Leader, our sponsors, partners, and affiliates do not endorse any guest or any organization they may be associated with. It's important to remember that every workplace is as individual as the people within it. Our recommendation is to always seek solutions that are specifically designed to help serve your team's unique needs. And to this point, please know we're here, ready to help you find the best way forward, no matter where your starting point is. You can connect with Dane or myself, Alicia McCraw, on LinkedIn or via the links contained in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. And hey, if you think someone in your network would benefit from this episode, feel free to share it or give us a 5-star rating. Those 5 little stars really help us reach more curious people like you. We'll catch you next time on The Future of Teamwork.